Hello, sir. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. 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 Shall we start, Manshu?
Yeah, let's do that. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, hi everyone. I am Nana. I am the founder and editor of the Philosophy Project, and I'm truly delighted to welcome you all to today's session titled "The X of Ignorance or Enlightenment: Missionary Literature and Making of Anti-Caste Modernity in Kerala." Today's session is held in collaboration with Let's Talk Tatva, a wonderful initiative started by the students from IIT Bombay, especially led by a dear colleague Himanshu. We are deeply honored to be joined by two remarkable thinkers, Professor Sanal Mohan and Shahshad, whose work brings to light the complex intersection of missionary activity, anti caste movements, and making of modern Kerala. This gathering, like many of our efforts, is rooted majorly in the desire to move conversations beyond our elite institutions and academic conferences and to create a more public, open, and radically welcoming spaces for learning and unlearning together. I think this is the major aim that philosophy wants us to teach. So thank you everyone for joining in, making a time to be a part of this collective reflection, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion ahead. And without any delay, I request my colleague Trideep to please take the session ahead and introduce our speaker. Over to you, Trideep.
Can everyone hear me? Okay,
Yes, we can.
good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tridip, and I'll be your moderator for the day. I'm a philosophy postgraduate. I have a bachelor's and master's in philosophy from Hindu College, University of Delhi. I currently also work with the Philosophy Project. So we're grateful to have each and every one of you here today, and we have two amazing speakers for you all. So now, before we begin, a few guidelines. So everyone except for the speakers here will be muted throughout the session for the smooth functioning of it. And if anybody wants to ask questions, they can either raise their hands or type out their questions in the chat box below. And we'll try our best to take everyone's questions as well. So let's get down to speaker number one. The first speaker is Dr. Sanal Mohan. He's a historian and former professor at the School of Social Sciences, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kolkata. He has held research and training fellowships at various institutions, including the Max Planck Institution in Germany, University of Cambridge, University of Pennsylvania, Emory University, and SOAS London. He also has served as director of the Kerala Council for Historical Research. His work mainly focuses on caste, colonial modernity, Dalit Christian movements, and slavery in South Asia. He is the author of Modernity of Slavery Struggles Against Caste Inequality in colonial Kerala and was published by the Oxford University Press, New Delhi, 2015. And so the title of his talk today is An Introduction to the Pullelikkunju, Complexities of New Imagination. Professor, over to you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sudhi, for your kind words of introduction and also the organizers of this program. I'm extremely thankful to my friend and research collaborator for this event, Shahzad, who graciously invited me to this conversation. And now, in fact, I'm incapacitated by some problems with my eyes. So I'm, I have to depend more on my memory than on the written text, which I do have, but uh, I cannot read those things until I undergo some kind of medical procedures. But because I said okay to this program, I agreed with Shahzad, I thought I will appear. So, so bear with me because I may not do the way definitely I wanted to do, but some of the ideas I wish to signpost, and I really appreciate this initiative of philosophers and looking at these questions, which are in fact a very difficult thing at the moment, as we come across quite a number of things happening on the streets out there in India. But I'm not bringing in those things. So I may wish to take you back to the late 19th century. So for the moment, we are not in India of today. So we are back in time, a historian's time of 19th century, mid to late 19th century and early 20th century. Uh, so Shahzad's has been talking about a major text which a late 19th century intellectual and CMS prelate or priest of that time, Archdeacon Coach. He was Archdeacon. He had a very interesting kind of career. I'm not going into the details of that, but he wrote this interesting text, Pullelikkunju, which is actually a kind of novel that, in fact, looks at uh, the manner in which missionary discourses developed in the public domain of say the southern region of Kerala at that point of time, uh, which was a princely state, the Travancore state. That's where this conversation had taken place. And Kunju is the protagonist, and I'm sure that Shahzad will talk more about that. And he instantly wrote a very interesting piece based on this text. My idea is to signpost the significance of this. So we are aware of all these social sciences debates uh, related to the notion of enlightenment, and even people have been talking about the darker side of enlightenment, and we know how much fraud is the whole notion of enlightenment as it has been used by historians, philosophers, sociologists, and so on. So there is a very definite body of literature dealing with this particular question. Yet, as the time that we are talking about, the late 19th century, we do come across, certain kind of intellectual and social change. That could be social change in a very limited sense. Let's focus more on the intellectual domain and whatever social change that was taking place. So those were occasioned by the new ideas that came in the wake of the Protestant missionary activities in the southern region of Kerala. But I'm sure that you find similar kind of things happening elsewhere in South India. And we do have some contemporary scholars talking about places like Nagaland, for instance, talking about how the missionary intervention was very, very central to some of those changes, etc. But I just want to draw your attention to the kind of writings that are existing today. And people also have spoken about the developments in the Tranquebar, that again as an example of missionary enlightenment and so on. So there is a definite debate that are taken place, basically looking at the new ideas. Now, in the mid to late 19th century, when I look at this text Pullelikkunju by Archdeacon Kosi, it becomes very clear that the author was trying to bring in to the protagonist this whole idea of enlightenment that is taking place. And there's a conversation in which a lot of ideas get articulated, people debate it, and so on. But what about the larger society where these kinds of debates are taking place? Because this is a particular text which has its own kind of structure in the sense that it ultimately it is something that's developed in the mind of a person. Then he writes down that, but yet it has a certain kind of reality with which it is in conversation at that point of time. So the protagonist of this novel engages in a critique of the dominant, the Brahmanical Hinduism. That's what is happening, and some of the fundamental assumptions of that in actual practice existing in the late 19th century Kerala, which the author identified as a negation of humanity, the negation of the notions of equality, and so on. So then he argues that we need to look for, a certain kind of alternative understanding of how can we really think about, these new notions of equality, which was not existing in the traditional society, but which perhaps was the most promising thing if you want to talk about the evolving times from that uh, uh, particular perspective. Now, I just made a statement earlier saying that we find similar kind of situations existing. Uh, I mean, I drew largely on Indian case, particularly this other south regions of South India where this sort of things were happening. And now, what is the significance of this? Because the research student who introduced the program talked about this anti-caste kind of mobilization, the coming of new ideas, and so on. Now, what I want to suggest is that when we bring in notions of equality, which is again a kind of idea drawn on uh, certain kind of Protestant humanism, which was earlier in existence in Europe. And as part, in a way, these missionary organizations drew heavily on those kinds of ideas, and wherever they went, in fact, we can actually think about, I mean, it is not without I mean, it has been critiqued by scholars from different perspectives, but we find certain ideas of uh, uh, humanism and other kinds of significant ideas about human society uh, that was translated into context of the missionary activities, practices, and so on. So, for example, we find this sort of ideas reaching, for example, in Nigeria. It's uh, I I think on a comparative reading, one could say that it happened almost the same time as it happened in the Kerala region. Uh, so, for example, the translation of the scriptures, or the Book of Common Prayer, and these are some of the very cardinal kind of texts which were translated into Malayalam language, the language of Kerala. So I think from late 1820s onwards, portions of scriptures were translated. And in a matter of few years, we find the Book of Common Prayer, which is very central to the Anglican Church liturgical practices, or liturgical practices of the Anglican Church in England. That was rendered into Malayalam. So almost around the same time, I guess, these texts were translated into Yoruba language in Nigeria, and you find very interesting kind of translations taking place in many other languages across the globe. So therefore, what I'm suggesting is that even as we look at texts, these late 19th century texts like Pullelikkunju, we do come across certain moments earlier, a few decades before this kinds of texts were written, we find the translation of scriptures, prayer books, and so on taking place. Now, what I want to suggest is that through this translations, what we really encounter is the translations on the one hand of the text, and on the other we find the translation of ideas. So now let's look at the whole idea of the certain understanding of humanism that comes out of this scriptural kind of interpretations. What does it mean to have a certain kind of centering of human beings as quite significant in a society where, for example, the humanity of a large segment of society has been denied. So therefore, in the native society of Kerala, so native I'm using in a very positive sense. In the Malayalam speaking societies, this could be done in the case of many other societies as well. We find new notions emerging and new ideas of human beings, or the new ideas of probably in this case, these texts will be talking more about man, more about men. But it at those times it encompassed women as well. But today, I know that we may not really accept that kind of an argument. But the point I want to suggest is that the whole idea of humanity was being thought about very differently. And now this idea of humanity, which has been drawn on the scriptural sources, I mean, this is what the missionaries have been doing, or through a new understanding of the human life existing in this particular Malayalam-speaking region, which was under uh, the princely native rule, but it was under the British. What we call as British paramountcy. What is happening at that point of time was introduction of these new ideas, and these ideas became quite central in the subsequent transformation. Now, we can really look at some of this from a very different perspective, because the idea was that the native society. This is from the perspective of the missionaries who thought that possibly the native society was steeped in what we call quote unquote ignorance. Kind of land of ignorance. That again I use as use within quotes. And are we going to undo this particular situation of being in ignorance? So the situation of being in ignorance needs to be undermined by bringing in a certain kind of idea, uh, which can show that the native society is existing in ignorance. Now, what is this ignorance all about? It's all about society, how things are happening. So, interesting aspect of it is that even there was we read in Western philosophical traditions. There was a desire to even talk about religion from a rationalist point of view. I mean, for the old, normal rationalist perspective, religion is an anathema. It's not something that is amenable to rational kind of discourses. But we reach a situation here where religion itself is to be understood as from a rational point of view. Now, if we develop this further from a religious studies perspective, we really identify the significance of religion as a social phenomenon and talk about the significance of that. As much as people are involved in it, we talk about all these things because religion is something where you find people engage with these ideas whether we like it or not. So therefore the whole question is the possibility of talking about religion from a rational perspective. Now here this rational perspective from a philosophical point of view could be extended further, uh, probably back in time to the times of Saint Augustine, who talked about a different kind of Christian worldview, drawing on these ideas of a city of God and other kinds of seminal texts of Western philosophy. Now, my point here is to show that. So, in the missionary writings, we find a certain kind of idea to present a religion in a rational, within a rational point of view. It has to be explained in that particular way. For example, we find in the 19th century one Malayalam journal being published, which is called Jnana Nikshepam. And that's the Malayalam term, which was published from Kottayam, CMS Press, which is a treasury of knowledge, if you translate that. So a lot of things would be, published in this particular journal. So they used to be articles on religion, Christianity, I mean, Brahmanical Hinduism, and all sorts of things were happening. And also, the same journal would carry articles in science, in physics. I mean, those times, this is late 19th century where we do not have exact division of these sciences into different branches, but we do think about, we do read about articles dealing with physics, chemistry, and all those things. So there also we read about religion. So my point is just this: there was a desire to make a religion also rational, and in Pullelikkunju, what actually we find is that the Kunjabula who offers the critique of Brahmanical religion, he wanted to show he wanted to show that the Brahmanical religion was not based on rational arguments. This is what he introduces. Now, my point is that if you really look at from the perspective of a historian dealing with intellectual history, now these points are important because the missionaries were introducing this whole notion of rational critique, uh, or a rational perspective in understanding religion, or offering a rational critique of religion, and then show that the whole idea of salvific religion that Protestant Christianity proposed was superior to the kind of religious ideas and practices existing in native society. And then the argument is built on the fact that this actually, releases human mind, which has been enchained to a certain kind of darkness, and you are going to bring in the light of enlightenment. So you have very strong metaphors being used. I've spoken about it elsewhere. Like darkness, light, from damnation to salvation. These are very standard missionary phrases that they used to use. But interesting aspect is that in a society where these discourses and discussions were not taking place, we find from mid to late 19th century very interesting kind of debates taking place. Now, of course, this is we are talking. You can tell this is 3:35. So please tell me at what point I should stop.
So you have time till 3:45. It's fine.
3:45. Thank you.
Mm.
What I'm suggesting is that so we have this whole debates taking place, and uh, you know uh, in the 19th century as in a society where literacy was very much limited. That was my point. Now, how do we look at this limited reach of? I mean, already the print was in existence in Kerala at that point of time, and a lot of translations taking place, ideas being translated, circulated, etc. Malayalam language had evolved as a very different one, away from the usual traditional kind of religious discourses. New themes could be discussed in this language. So there was a lot of intellectual activities taking place, but let us also remember the fact that the literacy was limited. Yet there is a certain kind of circulation of these texts and printed materials, and there's a small readership. And of course, they were confined to the upper crust of the society. And for the lower sections of society, if we look at the caste hierarchy of that time, or the social hierarchy, class hierarchy, etc., we do have the lower rung of society where literacy was not that much in existence. So I draw your attention back to the 1850s, when the missionaries started what they refer to as slave schools. These are schools for teaching 3 hours plus, religious Protestant Christian prayers, and holding reading sessions, reading of scriptures for the enslaved castes that are today being referred to as Dalits. So it began from 1800 and early 50s, 1853, 54, that time onwards, it was in existence. And by 1857, we read from the missionary report sent from the southern region of Kerala, the Travancore region, to London, back to the headquarters of this Church Missionary Society, referring to the fact that by 1857 there were enslaved caste people who could read portions of scriptures and give small and short sermons to the people of their community. You don't have a larger public space where everybody could come together and discuss things. That was not in existence at all. Whatever public space at that point of time existed was completely caste specific space, and which never allowed everybody to come together and discuss things of that kind. So therefore, for those who were enslaved, and who were untouchable caste, untouchables at that point of time, they would assemble in these missionary slave schools and read texts, and they have their reader, or the person who conducts services from their own group, giving sermons. Now, the significance of these sermons, I mean, I'm not pretty much sure how far researchers in India have done any kind of work in this particular area. The literature that I am familiar with has been drawn mostly from the enslaved context of African Americans in the US. So they all talk about the significance of sermons, because sermons are the occasions when the preacher is using the notions drawn on scriptures to articulate their problems, their kind of tribulations, the kind of sufferings they have, and so on. Now, I have written about it. I don't have time to, really bring in those stuff. But what I'm suggesting is that we find a very interesting kind of parallel travels of these ideas in the missionary context, in the sense that when people give sermons, they do talk about the sufferings that they had been undergoing, and these sufferings, this notion of sufferings, actually help them to develop a certain kind of intertextuality with the sufferings of Jesus, the Lord's passion and things like that. So here there is a completely different and altogether distinct understanding of human sufferings, and then these human sufferings get in certain ways transposed to the larger salvific history of the oppressed class. This is an idea which I want to really my friends here to think about. I'm sure that I haven't developed this much, but so here we find these enslaved caste people being put into a different salvific history. And when my friend and colleague Shahzad develops his ideas, you will realize that towards the end of this novel, Pullelikkunju, we actually read about the colporteur, the person who sells and distributes Christian literature. He gives a long sermon on the salvific history, starting from the times of Jesus' birth, and it is uh, until his resurrection, sufferings, and so on. So that is being narrated while these people sitting on the uh, that raised platform of the people tree, listening to him. I mean, so what I'm suggesting is that there's a certain kind of translation of all this salvific narrative in the local context. And now, in such context, we don't find the enslaved caste or untouchable caste. Whereas in their remote villages, wherever they were, either on the banks of the rice fields or on the clearings bordering the large estates of the landlords, we find them. And it is there that they had the slave schools where these kinds of discussions have been taking place. So we find two spheres where the whole salvific history gets really, explained to people. Now I have come across. Now I have only 3 minutes. So before I finish, I draw your attention to another late 19th-century novel, which in fact was written by a missionary based in Kottayam in English, Slayer Slane. Those who study literature, at least some of them are familiar with this particular text. And Slayer's Lane actually talks about the context of the interaction between these Syrian Christian landlord and his workers who are also Christians but enslaved people from the oppressed caste, from the Dalit communities. And it's a long story, I just cut it short. So the point that what I wanted to draw is that the person who hears the scriptures, his name is Paulus. In the local rendering, he is referred to as Paulusa. So it's a derivative of the name Paul. So the Mr. Paulus, who is laborer attached to the Syrian Christian master, was implicated in the accident and eventual death of the landlord's daughter. And to the great relief of the readers, they realized that in fact this young girl did not die. She was really secured by another person, and that was nobody else other than this Paulus himself. He snatched away this girl from the throat of death, and she escapes. And from this uh, boat accident that had taken place in the late evening. And then, because the landlord thought that this Paulus was behind the death of the girl, he feared retribution and he escapes from there, and he leaves the place and goes to the eastern hills, and then he becomes a pastor. And so by the time he had already learned as an agricultural laborer quite a good portion of scriptures, and then he started giving sermons. And eventually, the remorse filled this landlord who was this very cruel towards his enslaved Christian workers. He undergoes a certain kind of transformation, or he himself was a traditional Christian, but he undergoes an internal conversion and he becomes a real Christian. But that sort of transformation happens at the behest of the what you call the sermon which Paulus himself was giving in a remote village, where the landlord reached as he was in search of Paulus. So that's the moment when the actual killer was killed by this sword of knowledge, which is in fact the theme of our talk today. So what happens is that even as there is a traditional Christian church and traditional Christianity and Christians who were being controlled by the caste worldview and ideas generated from that, they were being enslaved by not the social slavery, but by the slavery of ignorance. And then here the scriptures rendered by an untouchable Christian who is not a traditional Christian happens to be the bearer of sword, which actually hits this chain of ignorance. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful talk.